Welcome to this YSL tutorial. In this session we're going to teach you how to work with lists in reporting services reports. What you'll learn in this session is all about how to work with lists. We'll start by showing you how to add a list to a report, and then how to add fields to that basic list. We'll spend a bit of time talking about how you can arrange items in a list, mostly using rectangles. And then finally we'll talk to you about how to create a grouped list and how you can add charts and tables to it. So let's get started. In a basic reporting services report, you'd normally use a table like this to display your results. So each record occupies its own separate row, and each column displays a different field from the dataset. But with a list, you can create a much more interesting layout for each record in the dataset, similar to the example shown up here. So we've gone slightly over the top in terms of our colour scheme and the number of gauges that we've used, but hopefully you can see the idea. It's the same information as we displayed in the basic table, just with a more interesting layout. And that layout is repeated for every separate record in the dataset. And in this video, we're going to teach you, basically, how to create the same thing. The basics of lists are quite simple to understand. You'll need to begin by creating a report including a dataset, as we have here, and then you can insert a list using the toolbox, just as for any other existing report item. If I double-click the List tool, I'll appear to insert just a basic rectangle into the report. But if I click inside the list, I'll expose the Row Selector and Column Selector buttons, indicating that this is a tablix item. Now all I need to do, if I just increase the width and the height of the single row in the list, all I need to do now is insert the appropriate fields using the report data window. I'll drag in, let's just see, 3 quick fields just to give you an idea of the basics, and I can roughly arrange those. Maybe increase their width a little bit. Now when I preview the report, I'll get this basic arrangement of data for each record in the dataset. The key to creating a good list lies in how you lay out the items in each row. So I'd like to show you a couple of useful techniques for building a sensible looking list. So back to the design view for this basic report. I'm going to add in a little section that shows me the film's financial data, so that's the film's budget and box office takings. And because I'd like to see those items grouped together, I'm going to first of all add another rectangle inside the one I'm working with. So I'm going to drag a rectangle tool from the toolbox and place it over here towards the right hand side. And that gives me a neat little area in which I can lay out my other items. So from the report data window, dataset, I can look for the film budget dollars and drag that into the rectangle, and then the film box office dollars also. Now within this rectangle I might also want a little text box to give the group of items a title. So from the toolbox again I can drag in a blank text box and add some sort of text to it, so I'll call it financial data or something similar to that. And then all I need to do now is arrange these items within the rectangle so they look neatly arranged. Don't want to spend too much time doing this, otherwise you guys are going to get bored. Quick bit of fun formatting, and there we go. The last step here is I'm going to give this rectangle a basic background colour, just to make this area stand out from the rest of the list. There we go, pale blue will do. And annoyingly that means that because all text boxes have a transparent fill colour by default, I'll also need to change the background colour of these boxes as well. Let's see, it's going to look fairly horrible at this point, but never mind. Hopefully this is enough to give you the basic idea. So if I preview the report now, there we go, a simple rectangle containing 3 text boxes, but neatly arranged and clearly distinct from the rest of the list. I could just do with adding another couple of text boxes now to label these budget and box office takings cells. So if I head back to the design view, with these 2 text boxes selected, I can resize them, and then head back to the toolbox and drag in another couple of text boxes. So there we go. Give them a quick label. and just drag them so that they're neatly arranged. There's some really handy layout tools in reporting services that allows you to line text boxes up neatly. I think you can probably see that as I drag these boxes around, they snap to the other objects that are in the report. It makes life so much easier when you're trying to arrange things neatly. Nearly done. And a final preview of that report. And there we go. Another useful way to arrange items in a list is by simply inserting extra rows and columns as you would in a normal table. So to do that, I'm going to go back to the design view again, and if I select something inside the list, you can see that I expose the row and column selectors, just like in any Tablix item in reporting services. So what I'd like to do is insert a single row that contains the film's name, so create like a big banner heading. So I'm going to right click at the left hand side of the table and choose to insert a row above. I've got two options here. I can choose to insert it either inside the group or outside. It's quite important that you choose inside the group if you want this to be repeated for every record in the list. So when I choose that option, I'm simply going to drag film name into that text box. Now can you see that when I've done that with the new row, that the film name field fills the entire cell, unlike with my other fields in the original list that I can move around freely. And the reason for that is that this original cell in the list contains a rectangle which allows me to position my objects wherever I want. So I'm going to replicate that with my header and undo adding the film name into that row. I'm going to increase the height of it slightly, and then from the toolbox I'm going to drag a rectangle tool which will fill up the entire cell when I release it. This time when I drag the film name cell or film name text box into the header, it can now be freely moved around. So I can drag it around, increase the width and height, give the header a sensible background colour. Well, I say sensible background colour, some sort of background colour at least. And then a quick bit of basic formatting with the text. And hopefully make it a much bigger size. And if I preview the report again now, I'm going to banner heading which spans the entire width of the list. Inserting columns into a list is just as simple as inserting rows. So I head back to the design view, select something inside the list, right click on the column selector at the top and choose to insert a column. I don't have to choose which group it's in, or sorry, whether it's inside or outside the group this time. So I'm just going to insert a new column to the right, and then I have a new cell into which I can put some more data. Again, a sensible thing to do if you're inserting rows and columns into a list is to first of all insert a rectangle, and then once you've done that, as you drag in new fields, you will be able to arrange those in whatever way you like. So I could drag in the film Oscar nominations and Oscar wins, and again I can arrange these however I'd like to see them arranged. If you'd like your banner heading to span the entire width of the table, when you insert new columns, this cell doesn't automatically span the extra column. You can select all the cells in the row, right click on any one of them and choose to merge cells, and this means that I can now increase the width of that text box. And if I preview the report again, I'll have an even wider report. Obviously I'd need some work on formatting the Oscar information, but it's enough to hopefully give you the idea of how that would work. You're not limited to just inserting text boxes and rectangles into a list. You can also insert graphical items such as gauges, indicators, and even charts. So let's do that. I'm going to insert a gauge which is going to display how long a film lasts. So it's going to display the running time in minutes as a graphic rather than as a simple piece of data. So back to the design view, and I'm first of all going to insert a new row at the bottom of my list, which is going to be inside the group, and I'm going to increase its height. Then, as always, I'm going to drag in a rectangle to help me arrange things. Oops, I should have merged the cells first, shouldn't I? If I select those two cells, right click and merge, and there we go. So I've got a nice space where I can enter a gauge which will span the entire width of the current list. So back to the toolbox, find the gauge tool, and simply drag one into that rectangle. I need to choose which kind of gauge I want to display. I'm going to go with one of these basic horizontal linear gauges. And there it is. And because this is in a rectangle, I've got free rein over how I size the gauge. I'm going to try to make it span the width of the film name title, so you can see that as I drag it to the corners there, it lines up and snaps to the edges of film name. What I need to do next is tell this gauge what its pointer should point at, if that makes sense. So if I select the gauge, click onto the pointer itself, I'll see the gauge data panel. And if I select from this drop-down list the film runtime minutes field, this pointer will now point to that value. We've produced a much longer video about how to work with gauges, which is a useful thing to watch. Actually, at this point there's lots and lots of options available here. I'm just going to make a couple of final extra tweaks. First of all, I'm going to remove this little red line area, which is referred to as a range. I'm going to select it and then hit the delete key on my keyboard to remove it. And finally, I'm going to make sure that my scale can show the full range of runtime in minutes, because by default it's set to a maximum value of 100. So if I right click on my scale, I can choose to view its properties, and I can change the maximum to something. I think the longest film in my database is around 201 minutes. So I'll set the maximum to 250, choose OK, and when I preview the report now, I'll have a nice little graphic pointing to the value of running time in minutes. Again, all I need to do at this point is change the formatting to just tidy things up. So just to finish with this basic list before we move on and show you something called grouped lists, I want to show you how you can quickly duplicate regions of data like this. So where we've arranged our financial data reasonably neatly, I want to replicate that little layout for the awards data and for the basic information about the film. Then we'll add a simple page break to make sure that each film appears on its own separate page, and then we're done. So back to the design view. I'm first of all going to remove the fields that are just floating around willy-nilly at the moment by selecting them. I can only do this one at a time, annoyingly, selecting them one by one and hitting the delete key on the keyboard. What I'd like to do then is copy this rectangle and all of the objects inside it. Unfortunately, that's really easy to do. If I right click anywhere in the background of that simple rectangle and choose to copy, I can then choose to paste it anywhere else in the same report. Let's just quickly arrange these. I'm going to paste it there once and also here. Change the widths of the columns a little tiny bit. All I need to do now to modify the information displayed in these text boxes, because these are connected to fields in the report data in the dataset, all I need to do is choose from the field selector which piece of information I'd like to display. So I'm going to choose the film's release date for this one and the film runtime in minutes for this one. I can then edit the basic text in here to show things like basic data and label them appropriately. Do with a slightly wider text box there, never mind. Runtime, I'm just going to edit that bit of text to make sure that my text box doesn't span over multiple lines. And then finally over here, I want to show the Oscar nominations and the Oscar wins. I'll call them noms and wins, just for the sake of convenience. And then change the title to something like so. So you can quickly replicate, once you've set out a little area with a neat arrangement of text boxes, you can quickly duplicate that by copying the rectangle, and hopefully when we preview the report everything will look reasonably neat. I need again a little bit of formatting on my date to make sure that the text box doesn't change in height, but hopefully you get the idea. The last step here, as you can see, as you build up more and more information within a list, it can be difficult to see more than one item at the same time on the same page. In fact, here I'm getting half a record. I'm just getting the title of the film Munich and none of the data below it. So what I'm going to do is add a page break at the bottom of each film. Back to the design view. To do that, I'm going to use the row groups panel at the bottom of the screen. Right click on the details object there and choose group properties. And on the page breaks tab, choose to add a page break between each instance of a group. Click OK, preview the report, and I should now see each film on its own separate page. For the next example, we're going to show you how to create something called a grouped list. And this is where you have a list where each record contains multi-value items in it. So here we're looking at details for each country, a list of films made in that country, and a chart showing a breakdown of the box office takings. Getting that to work requires a bit more effort than what we've done previously. So let's show you how we can do that. To start with, I've created a data set containing the basic data I'd like to display. And what I'm going to do now is insert a list into my report. And then make sure it's fairly big, so I'm going to fit in quite a lot of data into this list. And then I'm simply going to add in the country name field. Now at this point, I'll have a repeat for every record in my dataset. So instead of just seeing each country name once, I'm going to see it for every single film in the dataset. So that's something like 260 films, I think, altogether, spanning 52 pages. What that means is if I want to insert something like a multi-value item such as a chart, if I try to add one of those things into my list, when I release the mouse button, I'll see an error message telling me that I can't insert a multi-value item into a detail cell. The word detail, I don't know if you might have spotted this a few times in reporting services. You see it in the groups panel down here, details, with this little icon next to it, the 3 lines. And those same 3 lines appear in this row in the table here. So what I need to do is I need to convert the detail into a group. And the simplest way by far to do that, I think, is to right click on the details object in the groups panel down here, choose to view group properties, and then simply add a group expression to group on the field you want. In this case, it'll be the country name. When I click OK, I should now be able to see, first of all, if I preview the report, I get each country name once. My report now spans just 2 pages rather than 52. And in the toolbox again, back in the design view, if I try to add a chart to my report now, I'll find that I'm able to do so. I'm going to add a basic pie chart, choose OK, and now I can set up which fields I'd like my chart to display. If I click onto the charts, I'll expose the chart data panel. I'd like each category to be made of each individual film in the group, and for the values, I'd like that to display a breakdown of the film's box office takings. As well as a chart in my list, I'd also like to display a table of the films made in that country. So interestingly, if I find the toolbox, I can drag another table inside my current list. And it behaves just like any normal table would. If I select from the field selector, I can choose the film name, film release date. I can delete any columns that I don't need. I'm probably going to increase the width of these columns a little bit. Apply a bit of formatting to the release date, making sure I can see the date in a sensible format. Change the titles quickly. And there we go. So that table of films is going to be repeated for every separate country in my list. I can't resist doing a bit more formatting. Apologies if you're getting bored watching this. And if I finally preview this report, that's the sort of output you can get. If you've enjoyed this training video, you can find many more online training resources at www.wiseowl.co.uk.